preach on sin. But y'all really get uncomfortable when I tell you I'm going to preach on money. So if you need to sneak out, I'll just turn the other way. We notice as we've been reading through the Gospel of Luke, that as Jesus is getting closer and closer and closer to his arrival in Jerusalem, and he needs to be there in time for the Passover, that his teachings are becoming more and more urgent and more direct. And we also see that he's using parables more and more often as the means of his teaching, as the vehicle that he's teaching. And why is that? Well, the word parable means to lay along beside. And so what he does, he takes an everyday event by everyday people, and he lays it aside of a story that has a spiritual truth. And the reason he does this is because when we remember the story, it's supposed to help us remember the truth as well. It's a way to call it into our mind. But the other thing is, when we hear the story, everyday events, there's usually some kind of little twist. And it makes you stop and go, oh, what? And then you have to kind of meditate on it and think about it a little bit. There were a couple of times when the disciples were hearing a parable and they couldn't figure it out at all. They would go to Jesus after. What in the world was that all about? And Jesus would have to explain it. Well, Jesus isn't here, so I'm going to explain one today. Past couple of chapters, we've been hearing a bunch of parables as Jesus has been teaching. And again, remember the most important part of a parable is what happens at the end of the parable, not at the beginning. And these parables always have a little twist at the end. We had a big banquet. Everybody was coming in and they were deciding where they were going to sit and not sit. And there was a parable about that. Then there was another parable about a man who held a great banquet and festival. And everybody who said they were coming and promised that they would be there all backed out. And so the man who was holding the great festival and celebration invited strangers to come in and fill those seats. And we had a shepherd who lost one of his 100 sheep. We had a woman who lost 10% of her life savings and income. We had a man who had 2 sons. Both of them were filled with contempt, and both of them dishonored and disobeyed their father, but one repented and returned back to the love of his father, and the other one, well, we don't really know. Jesus didn't finish the end of that story. Today we're going to look at another parable in this long list of parables that Jesus is teaching with. And it has been called the Unrighteous Steward. Now it's one of the many parables that Jesus uses to teach about money. Out of nearly the 40 parables that Jesus used that are recorded in the Gospels, about a third of them deal with money. Why? Why did Jesus give parables so often about money? You know, Jesus taught more about money than he did about heaven and hell combined. Why? It's because the people then who were listening, money was very important to them. Just like it is to us today. Money is very, we say, well, it doesn't really matter. Think about all the time in your life that you have spent thinking about money. How to get it. How to get more of it. How to spend it. How to save it. How to invest it. How to hoard it. How to share it. We spend a lot of our life thinking about money. Now, thinking about money isn't a bad thing, and money all by itself is not in itself bad. It's how we think about it that makes it either good or bad. Sadly, money most often tends to make us selfish, to make us greedy, and to make us very self-centered. But if we think about money properly, it should cause us to be thankful and to be generous and to be humble. One of the big things about this parable that makes it so different from some of the others is the shocking little twist at the end concerning the very unscrupulous behavior of some dishonest steward or manager, and then why and how the master praises him for it. So let's look at this teaching of our Lord. It's found in the 16th chapter. It opens the 16th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. And it starts with this, and this is a parable. Now, he was saying to his disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, or a steward, depending on your translation. And this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, for you can no longer be my manager. And the manager said to himself, well, what shall I do? Since my master is taking the management away from me. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. Notice at this point, Jesus is now, he was talking to the Pharisees. Remember, he dropped the mic on the last one and turned. Now he's talking to his disciples. He is talking to what we would call Christians, followers. He is speaking to us. And the story opens up as a very, very, very rich man. We can see just in the amounts of money and stuff that is being talked about here, how wealthy this man was. And so he had taken one of his servants and one of his slaves and had elevated him up, and he was supposed to watch over the household affairs. He was supposed to be in charge. So while the master was away, the business of the household, the business of the estate, would still be going on. And his job, this manager, was to handle all the business matters. Everything that had to do with the land and the commodities and the money of that property. And so it would also include the lending of and making sure he got the repayment of money. And he determined how it was to be repaid. So the first thing Jesus said, there was a guy, he was a manager, and somebody went to the master and said, you know that manager you had, that steward you had? You might want to check in. He ain't doing some stuff right. He's not handling things according to your best interest. It says he was squandering the master's possessions. Not everything that this guy was doing was in the best interest of the master. Kind of got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. And so the master, when he hears this accusation and he hears the evidence, he calls the managing steward in and says, you're fired. You're out. You're done. Bring me my books. Clean out your desk. You're done. You will no longer be a steward. I'll make sure you're not a steward of anything, any property, anywhere, anyhow. You're done. And so the steward walks out. He's in big trouble. What am I going to do now? Now, he'd been skimming off the top for quite a while. Remember, he is still a servant or a slave. So the first thing that's going to happen is the master's going to take everything he has. He's going to take it all back. He's going to have nothing. He said, now what am I going to do? You almost tell this guy had never done a hard day's work in his life. You know, he was like, well, I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm not going to do any physical. I can't do any physical labor. And he's proud too. And I'm too proud to beg. I don't know what I'm going to do. How in the world am I going to feed myself? How am I going to provide for my future? How do I know what's going to happen to me down the road? Oh, wait a minute. If they had light bulbs back then, what would have come on? It was an aha moment. He said, I know what I'm going to do to secure my future. Look at verses 4 through 7. I know what I shall do, he said, so that when I'm removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes. And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write down 50. And then he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. What a plan. According to Levitical law, one Jew could not charge interest to another Jew. It was against the law. But, like every other one of God's laws, they figured out a way around it. So it was illegal. Let's say if I wanted to lend, Simeon wanted to borrow money from me. And he wanted to borrow $500. shepherd. We'll call it shepherd. And I said, well, that's fine. You don't pay me back in money. You pay me back in wheat. And the equivalent of that, let's say I said, you owe me 20 bushels of wheat. And I want to get some interest on it. So if I said, you owe me 20 bushels of wheat and 20 bushels of interest, that was against the law. That was illegal. Couldn't do that. You get in trouble for doing that. But I could tell old Simeon, I'll lend you the money. You owe me 24 bushels to repay it. That was okay. Okay? It was in how they worded it. They couldn't call it interest. And so there were things that were added on because most people didn't pay back in money. You would borrow money to have the seeds and the crops and everything to produce, and then you would pay it back in what you produced, in the commodity. And so they were paying it back. And so you had to kind of guess what the value, it's like commodities market today. You're guessing how much oranges are going to be, and pork bellies are going to be in 2 years, 3 years in advance as you're doing that bartering and trading. And so what would happen is, since there was a lot of uncertainty about how much everything would be worth, you would add what was called an insurance. You'd add 20%. But you didn't call that interest either. And so then, whatever was over the interest rate that you wanted, that you couldn't call interest, and whatever was over the insurance rate that you couldn't really call insurance, anything you added over that was whatever went in the manager's pocket. So we can see here that a lot of times the amounts change drastically based on how volatile those particular commodities might be. So here's what the guy figured out. He says, here's what I'm going to call everyone. He probably had a book like this of all the money, of the master's money he had lent out. And he went to every single one. Remember, he's got to take those books back. He goes and gets the books, but on his way he goes by knocking on doors. I didn't talk to you for a minute. I didn't talk. And then, so he could turn the books in. And so Jesus gives us two examples of what happened when he went to visit all these people who owed the master the money. And he goes to the first guy and says, how much do you owe? He said, I owe 100 measures of oil. That would be olive oil. Now, olive oil was very speculative. You could have a famine, you could have locusts, you could have a lot of things that would affect it. And so you always had to pay extra when you were paying that back. But it could also be very lucrative for the farmer. So what he's saying is, most likely this guy borrowed money enough to be paid with 50 measures of oil. But by the time they added the insurance and they added the interest and everything, he owed them back 100 measures of oil. Folks, this is a lot. This is a lot of money. This would be the equivalent. 100 measures of oil is almost 900 gallons of oil. That would be the output of about 150 olive trees that this guy owed back. That's a lot. And so it says, here's what I want you to do. How much do you have on the books? He said, well, I'm supposed to pay back 100. He goes, here. Right here. Change it to 50 and sign it. And I'll sign it. And now you only know 50. What a deal. This guy just instantly like this doubled how much money he made in his crop because he didn't have to pay half of it back. Another one, he said, how much do you owe? He said, well, I owe 100 measures of wheat. Wheat wasn't quite in the same category as olive oil. It wasn't as subjective and as volatile. And so he said, well, I owe 100 measures of wheat. And he said, well, just let's make it 80. I'll write down 80, you sign it, and we'll just say you only owe 80. And basically what that did was, it pretty much took off the insurance that would have been added onto it. And so this unrighteous steward, he goes to every single one of these households, slashing 50%, 20%, 25%, just right off of the top. And you know when he went in and knocked on the door and says, can I talk to Joel, how you doing? Hey, listen, I just wanted to stop by. Man, I tell you, we've been like this for years. I love you. I know you love me, and I know you owe some money. Listen, I want to help you and your family out. You know, I know things are tight. You just have no child. Let me tell you, just listen. I know he says you owe 100, but I love you, man. Let's just make it 50. How about that? You and I are best friends. Okay? And I know I want to do this for you, and if I ever need anything, I know you would do it for me. So let's just call it 50. And he went to every one of these houses doing it. And every one of those people that did, when he left, they would go, wow, I can't believe what he just did. I'll tell you what, that guy is all right in my book. And the thinking of the steward is, you know, I might have 75 people I just visited. And I go by one guy's house and say, hey man, you mind if I stay here overnight? You mind if I say, what are y'all having for dinner? And they said, come on in. For all you've done for our family, so you need to stay a week, come on in. He'd stay there for a while. He'd leave, go down the street, go to the next guy's. Man, free food, free lodging, taken care of, sweet deal. Now we know from the story, and everyone who is listening to the story knows that one day the master is going to have the books in his hands. And he's going to look down and see where 100 was scribbled out and 50 is written down and it's been signed. That makes it official. He can't change it. And so all those folks who are listening to this story, they got to be, oh man, when that master gets that book, holy moly. And he sees what that steward did, how he cut all of that money out. He is going to be fit to be tied. He is going to be furious. He's going to get that steward and going to chuck it. Wouldn't you think that? But Jesus says, but listen to this. Verse 8. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. Shrewdly. That was pretty inventive, wasn't it? That was pretty smart. He just figured out how to get his future taken care of. That everybody be standing in line waiting to welcome him to come in. Man, come on in. He would always be welcome in their houses. Now this is a parable because it takes everyday event, everyday types of people, a steward, everyday finances, borrowing and lending, normal activities. But the twist is that the master, who had already dismissed the steward because of impropriety, now finds out that the steward went out and added insult to injury before the books could be handed over. And he responds to that unscrupulous behavior by acknowledging the ingenuity and the cunning and how that steward used the resources that were at his disposal to make friends who would care for him in the future. He didn't like it, but he just shook his head and said, that was pretty sharp. But look at what he did. I never thought of that, but that guy was pretty shrewd. Now, is Jesus teaching that he's condoning such dishonest behavior? Is he saying that it's okay to cheat other folks? Is he says it's all right if we shirk our responsibilities that we have towards other people, to be honest and fair? Is he saying it's okay to operate to deceive people? Is he saying it's okay for us to cook the books in order to make a profit for ourselves? The second half of that verse, verse 8, says that the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. You see, the parable is telling the story, putting two groups of people side by side. Jesus gives us these two. He says you have the sons of this age. These are the sons of the world, people of the world, unsaved. They are ruled and enslaved by the culture and the norms that are all around them. And then you have the sons of light. These are the redeemed children of the light. Jesus Christ is the light. They are no longer the children of the world and children of the darkness. They are the children of his marvelous light. He says, you know, I got two groups of people. He said, but you know, the people of this world spend a whole lot of time figuring out how they can use their money and possessions to work for their benefit. And sometimes the children of the light aren't as shrewd. A lot of times money is spent by both children to impress or obligate others. Children of the world a lot of times will spend it like that shrewd manager to get something in return, to obligate something. But we spend a lot of money. Somebody said we spend our money buying things that we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't know. See, the world has no problem spending money on or for someone else if they can expect to get something back in return. Some acceptance, some favor down the road. But Jesus said the children of the light aren't as shrewd in how they handle the money and possessions at their disposal. In verse 9, he gives us the instruction. Listen to what he says. Remember, he's talking to the disciples. He's talking to me. He's talking to you. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by the means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. What does that mean? It means that we're to take what we have, what we earn, what we make, how we get it. I don't care how you get it. It's called unrighteous wealth, unrighteous mammon, because it's given to us by the world. And he says that we're to use that, we're to be shrewd with that. That's our money, that's our possessions, that's everything that God has given to us by means of the world. And he said, and we're to use that so that one of these days money ain't going to buy what you need. And when it fails, you will have an eternal reward. And what's that reward? Remember the steward in this parable, his reward was that his future was set. Because no matter what house he knocked on, he knew that he was going to be welcomed and greeted and loved and just given things, treasures. And Jesus said, we're to take our money and things at our disposal, and we're to spend them so that when we get to heaven, there will be those people there also waiting to welcome us with open arms, to give us a great hug, to be glad to see us when they receive us into the eternal dwelling. As redeemed children of the light, we should be just as focused on using our money and our possession. I use our because it all belongs to God. But using let's call it that, the money and possessions at our disposal to guarantee a warm and joyful reception in heaven. We need to be thinking further down the road. Now, this all sounds reasonable. And when we think about it, it makes sense. Because when we spend the world's money to accomplish God's will and His purpose, we know that it produces heavenly treasures. And those are the things that we're storing up in heaven. As children of the light, how we spend our money in and for others should be the driving force in the decisions that we make. Because that's the reason why our Master has given them to us and placed them at our disposal and made us stewards of it. Folks, when we spend His money to support missionaries and those who will hear because of that and who will hear the message and come to a saving faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and be welcomed into the kingdom, folks, they're going to be standing there waiting for you to show up and thank you and bless you for your giving. When we take and spend the money that God has given us to share food or shelter or medicines or utilities with those who are in need, they're going to be waiting there in heaven to rejoice with you. Next Sunday is Mission Dignity Sunday. It's usually in June, but because of all the COVID stuff and everything, it got pushed back. It's the 30th of August. And you know, that's the time when the Southern Baptists make a collection, and it goes to widows and retired pastors who have mainly served out in rural areas. There's no retirement packages and all these things, and they're struggling to get by. And so it's a way to help support them. And they get a little check, you know, every month that helps them with medicine or rent or lights or whatever. And when we take what we have and we share that in a program like that, and we share that with those people, those men and women who have given their life for the gospel of Jesus Christ, don't you think that when we get to heaven, we will have a great time of rejoicing with them and celebrating in all that they did, and they will be blessing us for our kindness and generosity and love. Why? Because we cared enough to be shrewd to make that happen. Again, it all sounds so wonderful. And we can all understand the difference between the sons of the world, the sons of this age, and the sons of light. We get it. We understand it. And we all want to be numbered with the sons of the light. So, why do we as Christians fail to be as shrewd as that unrighteous steward? Why do we as Christians fall so short in kingdom giving? Jesus gives us 3 reasons. Verse 10. He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. Our first problem with kingdom giving has to do with the amount of what we have. I've heard people say, listen, I don't give much to missions and the church and the things. Now, things are kind of tight now. But, when I get that raise, or in a couple years, or after the kids move out, or once this happens and this happens, once I have more, then I'll give more. Doesn't happen. Because it has nothing to do with the amount. It has everything to do with the heart. And what that person is saying is, he is making a deal with God using the devil's tactics. And it's almost he's accusing of God of not giving him enough so that he can be faithful enough to care for others. God, if you want me to give more, you're going to have to give me more. If you're going to want me to be faithful and care for others, you're going to have to pony up. You're going to have to increase the pot. You're going to have to do more for me. And it doesn't matter how much more they have. Because we as consumers in America, the more we have, the more we spend. There's never enough left. It's not the amount. It is the heart that determines our faithfulness. That's why the most famous giver of all time is listed here in the Bible is that widow. Remember her? And Jesus said for all of eternity, people will remember those 2 little tiny pennies, those 2 mites that she went and put in the treasury. Not out of her excess, because out of her love and compassion to do something for someone else. In a country where our disposable income continues to bloom and has done so over the past decades, giving in, now I don't know if you speak for other churches and religions, but giving in Protestant evangelical churches has dropped to nearly 2% of our income. 2%. Out of all that God has given us, 2%. Why? It has nothing to do with the amount. We have lots. It has to do with the heart and where we want to spend it. So Jesus said it's not the amount. We won't be faithful no matter how much that amount is. If we're not faithful with a little, we're not going to be faithful with a lot. Second reason Jesus said we fail in our handling of our, call it mammon, that's our money and our possessions, is verse 11. Therefore, if you've not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you in the true riches to you? The first reason had to do with the amount that we're unfaithful with. The second one has to do with the opportunities that we have with what we've been given. You know, God places before us wonderful opportunities to advance His kingdom. Every day. He gives us ways and means for the gospel to be heard and for the love of Christ to be felt. Every day. Doors are wide open. Now, some of these things we get all excited about, giddy about. You know, held up the book bag. People, oh, book bag. Okay, we get excited about that. We get the one we have the shoe boxes out in a couple of months. Oh, the shoe boxes, the shoe boxes. But the opportunities are open every single day for us to reach out to people. Don't just wait till Thanksgiving and Christmas. Doors are open every day to use our time, to use our gifts, to use our talents, to use our possessions, to bless others, and to bring glory to God. Remember, we are stewards. Everything God gives us is to be used for His glory. And we don't see these opportunities because we get so consumed with being a consumer. We consume for ourselves. Folks, you're never going to see an open door unless you're looking for it. Because you're going to be focused on the things that you want to have and how you want to spend. The third lesson that Jesus gives for the reason why we fail to be shrewd as sons of the light with our men is in verse 12 and 13. And if you've not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth, or God and man. The third reason Jesus gives us why we fail in our kingdom giving is because we forget whose money and possessions it is. Well, they are. I don't have any English teachers that do. He says you can't serve. By serve, he's talking about a slave. If you're a slave, you belong 100% to a master. It's not like you can show up at 9, be off at 5. It's not like one day I'm going to go serve this guy, the other day I'll be his servant. No, you don't get those choices. You belong to whoever it is you serve. 24/7, every day. And the one that you serve is, by definition, your master. There's no days off. And Jesus is saying our hearts and our actions reveal the truth of who our real master is. It will tell everything about whether we're the sons of the age or the sons of the light. Are we sons of the world? And therefore slave to the things of the world, the gadgets and the gadgets and the possessions? Is that what motivates us and drives us? To have the newest and the latest and the most and the best? While so many around us have nothing or hand-me-downs? You know, I got to thinking, so many of the things that I thought were so valuable 10 years ago are either in the trash pile somewhere or ended up on some yard sale table. And yet at the time, I had to have that. It's because my heart wasn't in the right place. Yeah, man, I may not have quite enough money, but I made sure I had that because that was the thing. I tell myself now, I'll qualify because this was before I say it, but one day I woke up and said, you know, I know some people who can play musical instruments. I think I'd like to play a musical instrument. I saw them people in there playing on hee-haw. I said, I'm going to get me a banjo. I got that banjo. I played it, bing, bing, boing. Oh, string broke. Went back in the case, went in the closet. I never saw the banjo again. It was on the case. I said, well, that was too much work. I'm not going through all of that. You got to replace the strings, and I didn't know. Nobody told me that. But yet, what was the driving force? I had to have that. Take that money that I spent on a stupid banjo, and look at how many families I could have helped. Look at what I could have done with it. You see, it's our thinking, and Jesus says it's our thinking, it's our attitude towards what we have. Too often we look at what we can do for ourselves first, and whatever's left over, we'll throw the scraps out. And next week, Jesus is going to, 2 weeks from now, he's going to talk about a rich guy, and all he did was throw the scraps out to somebody who was poor. And Jesus said, that's who we are, if we're not being shrewd. And being shrewd is taking everything that God has given us at our disposal and figuring out a way that we can use it, not for this world, but for the next. Just like that steward. Are we slaves to the culture, to Hollywood, to Madison Avenue, to the TV ads, all of those things that entice us and teach us that we've got to have that, rather than listening to the word of the Lord and reaching out to those in need, those who are hungry, those who are hurting? Are we sons of the light? Are we sons of the world? Jesus says you can't be both. It's an either-or thing. He says you cannot. That means it is impossible to serve mammon and God. Now let's be honest. We all want to be sons of the light. But we all also want all the stuff that we see that really kind of entices us. We kind of want to have it both ways. We want to be generous to a point, but not give too much because I still like that set of skis, or that boat, or that fishing pole, or that one, or whatever it is. We want it to be both. And Jesus says you can't do both. You're either wholly dedicated and committed to serving one or the other. Does it mean that every penny that we have, we can't spend any on the things that we need? No. What it does say is the money that, and the incredible blessings that God continues to give us, if you've got 10 extra bucks, are you figuring out how you're going to spend it on yourself? Or are you going, I got $10. How can I help the kingdom with this? What can I do with this? Because I'm going to tell you, think of it this way. If I told you, if I guaranteed you, you would get a check for $1 million if every week you wrote a check for $50 and gave it to Arnold. But it had to be there by 3 o'clock on Tuesday. Every week, $50, 3 o'clock on Tuesday. And if you did that for 1 year, you would get a check for $1 million. Would you do it? Arnold says, I see you try. Why would you do it? It's because when you look at what you would pay and look at the return or what you're going to get, that is so much more than 52 times 50. It is worth it. I want to do that. And you have a week, you say, man, things are really tight this week. You know, the heat pump went out, a tree fell on my truck, yada, yada, yada. But it came time to pay them bills, and you say, I can do without this. I'm paying that $50. I'm already halfway in. Ain't no way I'm not paying that $50 to my debt. Okay? I'll do without because that is that important. But Jesus is saying that our kingdom giving should be just like that. That any and everything we have above and beyond what we really truly need, our first thought should be, how can we use this for the kingdom? Because all of that money and all those possessions and all those banjos and all that other stuff is going to be gone. It what we give. And not only will it be great for God and His kingdom, but when you get to heaven, you will be rewarded for your faithfulness and your giving and your kindness and your consideration and how you dealt with the possessions that the Master gave you. And you do it because of the great reward. And Jesus is saying, you need to be shrewd. As sons of the light, you're not worried about who's going to welcome you into their home next Thursday. You need to be shrewd and thinking about who it is that you can help, A, get to heaven, and B, bless you once you get there. That should be our concern. Now, the teachings from Jesus about money are never subtle. They are meant to strike at the very center of our hearts. I don't know about you, but when I read any of these, it convicts me of my waste, and my selfishness, and my materialism, and my greed, of who it is I'm called and supposed to be versus who it is that I'm acting like. When Jesus gives us these parables, it is meant to make us examine both our priorities and the future that we're seeking. Our view of money will always create contention. It's money that causes wars. It's money that creates political parties and philosophies that can't get along. It's money that causes most of the problems in marriages. And it is money that causes that division, that contention that we have in our hearts of who it is we're going to spend it. And Jesus said that it's money that unless we're as shrewd as the steward in that parable, it will rob us of the potential joy and joyful friends in heaven. So Jesus is asking the question, who do you serve? How do you respond to both the physical and the spiritual needs of people around you? Are you looking to find a way to bless someone else? And how we respond to that question will determine the answer to whether we belong with the category of the sons of this age or the sons of light. Because it tells everything about our heart. Who do you serve? The Lord asked the question. He knows. He wants us to know too. Hallelujah. Amen. Lord, like so many of your lessons and teachings, they are hard. Because it goes against our natural inclinations to look out for number one first, to care for ourselves first. And so, Lord, would ask that you first would forgive us for our greed and our selfishness. But, Lord, also, too, help us to see open doors. Give us, Lord, in our hearts a deep desire to seek and to find those in need. Lord, that we might be a blessing to them. Not because of anything they can do in return for us, but because, Lord, we know that it will honor you and bless you. And, Lord, it will set off a great rejoicing with those friends when we meet them again in heaven. Father, help us in this daily struggle that we have. Help us in our decisions each day of whether we serve you or them.